And I'll call to order this planning meeting of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores, and welcome all members of council, and say good evening to everyone who is watching us on the live stream this evening. We're glad that you're with us. So the second item on the agenda is additions, deletions, amendments, and I would like to request consent of council to amend the agenda as presented. The item 6.2.4, the staff report on the official plan review, is ought to be a public meeting and not a report. So I'd like to ask consent of council to move that to become item 5.2. Is there any objection to that? I see no objection, so we will make that adjustment to the agenda. All right, so then that moves us on to disclosures of pecuniary interest and nature thereof. I'll ask any member if you have a pecuniary interest that you'd like to declare at this time. Seeing none, of course, you can do that anytime if you need to. That moves us then on to adoption of minutes. And we have the minutes of June 15th, 2020, and there is a resolution that the Planning Committee minutes dated June 15, 2020 are hereby approved as circulated. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by Matheson, seconded by Grace. Questions or comments on that set of minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? It's carried. That moves us on to public meetings, and we have two public meetings this evening. And the first one, 5.1, is Z 2020-042, Town of Saugeen Shores, Lamont Sports Park. And I'll just remind everyone of the process. We will begin by hearing from the planner. Then there will be an opportunity for the proponent to speak, and then at that point we will hear comments from members of the public who wish to speak to the application, following which we will then there will be an opportunity for questions for clarification from members of the committee. No decision will be made on this application this evening. The purpose of this meeting is to hear from the public, and then this matter will come back to the planning committee and eventually council at a future date for a decision. And I would encourage anybody with interest in the application to contact the planner. They can let you know how to do that when they're online, and you will be informed of future progress with regard to this application, or either application we're going to consider this evening. So for the first one, I've already read it out, the Lamont Sports Park, and I'll turn it over to the planner for the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, members of committee. So this presentation is for a public meeting for the Lamont Pit zoning bylaw amendment, proposed zoning bylaw amendment. It is a public meeting, so anyone listening who would like to receive notice of the public of a decision on this application is encouraged to contact either the clerk of the municipality, Linda White, or they can email the Lakeshore Hub office for planning applications at bcplpe@brucecounty.on.ca. So I'm just going to share my screen here so I can bring up the presentation. Okay, good. So here we are. The lands are the Lamont Pit lands, just on the edge of town, and have been used as an aggregate pit by Harold Sutherland Construction most recently for quite a few years. So the aggregate potential is extinguished, and Harold Sutherland's in concert with the town are in the process of revoking the license on the lands and going through the rehabilitation process with the Ministry of Natural Resources. So the proposed use is a sports field complex. Just bear with me. There we go. And just to give you a sense of what the existing context right now, it's extractive industrial is the zone, and open space is proposed. So open space is the park zone. Surrounding uses include residential, rural, agricultural, and there's some environmental protection lands as well. It is partially serviced with water, and in greater detail, I'll get into the town's undertaking a bit of a servicing assessment right now to determine the most appropriate way to service the lands from a sewage perspective. And access is via concession 6. So just to reiterate, it's proposed to go from extractive industrial to open space. The official plan is generally supportive of both the county level and the town level of rehabilitated pits converting to park-like uses. So there's permission at the official plan level. So we're not looking at an official plan amendment, just a zoning bylaw amendment, because the park type use is already permitted in the extractive industrial designation. And here's a concept plan. Members of council may be familiar with this. I think this was from a recent presentation. However, it might be new to members of the public who are on the line. So it's an 8 ball diamond sports complex. I believe the initial phase is 4 ball diamonds to start. Not sure of the number of parking spots, but there's several dozen parking spots with sort of overflow proposed in the grass area. So, 500 car parking lot I see. So pretty ample space for parking. And then there's pathways involved to connect to the existing rail trail as well. So part of the proposal, part of the open space zone is also seeking to permit public utility or public works type uses. So you see close to the road, there's a maintenance building and yard proposed as well. So in terms of interdepartmental and agency consultation, most notably the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority is of the opinion that the zoning bylaw amendment is acceptable. So they've submitted their comments indicating where they feel the proposed or the delineation of the EP zone is, and they're recommending that development stay outside the EP zone. So town's working with the SVCA on that matter to ensure that the proposed diamonds are outside of the EP zone. At the time this presentation was submitted for inclusion on the agenda, we had received no public comments, so that was as of last week. However, just today we did receive a comment from a Miss Rosie, and I believe she's on the line. I'm not sure if she'll speak or not, but those comments were forwarded to committee members right before the meeting, and I'll just briefly go over the concerns. Miss Rosie, I think, is an astronomer, and she's concerned with the impacts of light pollution from the ball diamonds and also noise from the proposed use as well, and had questions about other events that might take place on the property. So I indicated staff would follow up with planning staff would follow up with town staff and try to get some answers in that regard, because I wasn't immediately sure what the lighting situation was proposed to be. So before we just get into the summary, there's some issues that I've already touched on, so I won't go into them in great detail, but I just wanted to note that an archaeological assessment was completed for the lands, stage 1, and not surprisingly, they concluded that any archaeological potential had likely been exhausted due to the former use of the lands being a pit. I've already spoke to about the traffic or the parking situation. In terms of traffic, 2 primary concerns or issues that we'd be interested in is impacts to nearby aggregate pits and nearby aggregate operations. So I don't think there'll be much of an impact in that regard. The distance from the closest aggregate pit is, I believe, the entranceway that is to the next entranceway of an aggregate pit is 300 meters approximately. And there's no road improvements proposed for concession 6 at this time. So to recap, this is amendment to the zoning bylaw from extractive industrial agricultural and the planned development zone to the open space zone, open space special to be more specific, to allow, in addition to the park uses, the ball diamond uses, public works uses as well, and the environmental protection zone. So tonight's meeting, of course, is for information purposes, to present the application and to see if there's any questions and provide the opportunity for public to engage in the process. And staff will return at a subsequent date for a recommendation. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thanks very much, Daniel. I guess we'll ask first, I guess I probably should know this, but don't. Is there anyone who is going to speak on behalf of the applicant? Jay or Amanda?
Wasn't a plan to address committee in any more detail. We are interested in getting input from the public at this point. So, and if there's questions, we want to take them away and come back with complete answers.
Okay, thank you. Then we will ask if there's any member of the public who wishes to speak. I do know that Miss Rosie is on the call this evening. I see her there. Miss Rosie, do you have any comments that you'd like to make at this time? You're on mute there. Oh, you're still, Ms. Rosie, you're on mute. You're muted right now. If you could just turn your mute off. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to make a few comments with regard to a resident that lives, I live here on the rail trail. And I've been here for the last 9 years. And behind us, of course, just directly behind us is the gravel pit itself. And I'm not an astronomer, I'm merely a stargazer. I'm an amateur astronomer, but thank you, Daniel, anyway. And I really do enjoy my backyard, the night sky. That's part of why I love Port Elgin so much. The night sky and the quiet. And I don't really have a problem with the idea of living land uses. I think it's a wonderful idea. And I think the sports park, I remember volunteering down at the Plex just before winning the, volunteering to, and I had a hard time because I have a hard time with computers, but nonetheless, and I have grandchildren that play baseball and a son-in-law. So I'm not necessarily against that. What bothers me is how this is going to impact my lifestyle. I spend a lot of time in my backyard. I don't, of course, during the daytime, it wouldn't bother me at all, but it's nighttime that concerns me. The idea of 8, I know that 8 implies tournaments, huge tournaments, and perhaps other uses as well. And for that reason, I'm quite concerned about noise. And perhaps all in all, other than the dark skies issue and light pollution, which I think is huge, because if there are 8 ball diamonds, and I don't know anything about the way ball diamonds are set up, but I'm going to assume that there are 4 light standards, and I want to know what those standards look like for each ball diamond. This is just an assumption, and I could be totally wrong. 32 high-powered light standards in that now dark pit frightens me. I see my night sky gone, and that to me is, of course, the main concern. If the hours of operation I guess what I'm asking is for more information on the site plan and what they plan on doing in terms of developing that site for baseball or for these sports fields, and what the impact of that lighting would be, and perhaps if there's some kind of lighting that could mitigate some of the problems associated with it. So I guess I'm looking for information, and I'm looking for some reassurance that this proposed, if it goes through, this proposed sports field won't be operating at all hours of the night. I understand that there will probably be evening games, but will it be every night of the week? And will it be late into the evening hours? And I guess I'm looking for reassurance in that regard, and also the types of lighting that will be used for this that would perhaps have the least impact on the environment in terms of light pollution. And that's it. Those are my concerns.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rosie. I guess we could ask, are there comments from either the planner or from Mr. Posner on behalf of the applicant?
Well, I mean, for me, I don't have the answers at the moment. We haven't got a design with the detail that you might need. So we'll go back, ask our community services staff and the consultant so we can get that information, because I think council needs to hear it too, not just members of the public.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Are there other members of the public who wish to speak to this application? I think Ms. Rosie was the only one I have on the list, so so I don't think we have any more comments. So I guess we'll close the public portion of the meeting and we'll turn it over to council for questions for clarification, and I'll call on the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your presentation, Mr. Rosie. And the only thing I may add, I know over the years, the ball groups have been, at least in my view, fairly respective of the it's 11 o'clock curfew. Maybe that's too late still, but I know that our ball diamonds that are lighted over on particularly Joseph Street and Lakeview and at the campgrounds, it's a pretty strict 11 o'clock curfew. And I think overall, people, the ball groups have been fairly good with abiding by that, at least with my experience. But that might not be helpful to you in terms of the lateness, but that's what I found over the years. Just for a quick response, I know staff will probably be able to provide a little more information to you at a later date.
Yeah, and we'll also be able to hear information about the town has a dark sky policy with regard to new developments. And so there'll be, I think we should at least hear how this application will conform to that. Are there further comments? Well, I should say questions for clarification from members of the committee. Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, through you. I also sympathize with the speaker's comments, and I think that I too would like some sort of assurances that whatever technology of lighting that we use, it will be the least intrusive to the upper sky. And I know lighting has come a long way over the last little while with the advent of LED and directional lighting and shades, and I can fairly well ensure the residents that whatever can be done will be done, and along with the curfews. But I had a question also, and that was with regards to just the rationale for the zoning changes. I understand that we're going to change the piece of land that is currently the extraction pit and make that open space or make that ready for parkland. But what's the rationale behind rezoning the portion of land further to the east, which is currently in agricultural use? Is it just a matter of efficiency to rezone it all at once, or is there some near-term plan to remove that land from agricultural use and get it ready for another use?
Well, that's Mr. Posner.
Yes, no, certainly there is a plan, certainly a tender closed for us to examine the potential of that land as a employment land block. We haven't submitted any planning application for that yet, so we want to discuss that with the successful consultants. So we're just asking for rezoning of the former licensed area at this time.
Of course, that will not preclude any continuation of agricultural use until such time as we get an idea of what we really want to do with that, right?
That's right. I think we have a contract now with the current farmer, and they're able to continue farming as they have for the last few years at least. They understand though that at certain times, over the next few months even, that he may be impacted, but he's aware of that, and we have a contract with him.
Okay, further comments from members of the committee? I don't see any. So we will hand this back then to staff. We've heard the comments from the public, and we will be expecting a report for a decision in the coming weeks. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
That moves us then on to our next public meeting, which is, for me, it's official plan review and focus issues. And so we will begin by turning it over to Mr. Posner in this case for the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's my pleasure to give more of an introduction, but I wanted to also update council that that this has been a deliberate process. Our official plan review has had a lengthy pause, mainly because of COVID. We've had to wait 4 months. We really wanted this meeting back in March, but sort of with that, a very brief sort of comment is that we've consulted over the last, I guess, almost year with members of the public through an online survey and stakeholder groups. And what we were trying to do is get comments from them. They could be detailed, but we really wanted to allow those comments to wash over us, because we really wanted to understand what are the top priorities for the community, because we knew we wanted to come back to council and say, this is what we've heard, and we want council to direct us to continue with the OP review, but focused on the areas that are identified in this report. And so we heard a lot, but we also wanted to make sure, well, what we heard is actually true and it's actually representative of the community. So we appointed a public advisory committee. They also saw those same comments. And we were pleased when they came back with their recommendation, which is also attached. They also highlighted the very same concerns, that housing, the environment, and urban design heritage are the top priorities of the town. And that, so I'm very happy to turn it over to Steve Weaver and Catherine Parrott of GSP. They will go into more detail, much more detail about what we're asking tonight, which is to affirm that those are the top 3 priorities, and that we use our budgeted resources to review, research, and consult the residents, community partners, Indigenous communities, and other agencies as we move through the remainder of the update.
Good evening.
Mayor, then I'll leave it to you to allow others to go.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Weaver.
Good evening, Mayor Charbonneau, members of council, staff, and members of the community who are attending the meeting tonight. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for accommodating us on your agenda tonight with the technology and not being able to meet in person. We appreciate the ability to present you with some of our findings to date, and for sure we really appreciate the opportunity to help with your official plan review project. For me, this will be my second official plan review project with the town of Saugeen Shores. I'm dating myself a little bit, but going back to 2004 to 2006, we worked on a couple of projects, including a Parks and Trails master plan with Vice Deputy Mayor Myatt, who was Parks and Rec Director at the time. So it's good to see some familiar faces still at the table at the town, and good to be involved with the town again on this project. We do have a few slides to share with you for our presentation for tonight's public meeting. And both myself and Catherine Parrott of our office are available for questions following the presentation. We're certainly happy to assist with answering any questions from council and the public tonight. So I will endeavor to share my screen here, and hopefully that will work okay. Okay. Can you see the presentation okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So these are the 4 main points that we would like to cover this evening for the purposes of the meeting. And some of the first couple of bullet points are really introductory in nature, so I'll go through those fairly quickly. But they are important to establish a little bit of what this document called the official plan is really all about, why it needs to be reviewed from time to time. And then the second two bullets will really focus more on some of the process elements with respect to typical official plan review process, but more specifically the process that Jay and ourselves have put together for the project. Some of the objectives that we've set out to achieve through this process, and then the bulk of the presentation will be spent on those three areas of focus that have been identified, both through the consultation and our review to date. So an official plan is really a tool for municipalities throughout Ontario. It's a tool made available through legislation called the Ontario Planning Act. The purpose of that tool is really to manage and guide land use and direct development in the municipality. And in Saugeen Shores, the official plan actually does not apply to the entire municipality. It applies to your two settlement areas of Port Elgin and Southampton. The balance of the community outside of those two settlement areas is subject to the county official plan. And the county official plan, of course, applies more broadly across the entire Bruce County. The other elements of the official plan are really related to focusing municipal investments in public infrastructure, protecting the environment, and servicing. So the Planning Act is fairly specific in that regard, in that it says all municipal bylaws and all public works shall conform with your official plan. So it is an important document that sets that framework for those significant decisions related to land use, development, the environment, and infrastructure. There are a range of topic areas and policy areas that are addressed in an official plan. Population, housing, and jobs. You know, where should that be directed? When should it occur, and in what form? Where can new businesses and jobs be located in the community? Where should new residential, commercial, and industrial areas, institutional areas, and other types of land uses be located? And what pattern should future development take? So should there be continued redevelopment and intensification, and in what forms in the current urban areas? And where else should development occur? Is there sufficient land available, and where is that land designated? With respect to infrastructure, an official plan helps to establish what services are available and what services are needed in the future. So it's not a detailed servicing document that will set out, you know, every pipe and every pumping station and every water main that needs to be built in the future, but it does establish what services are required in a broader sense, and also aligns land use, development, and related decisions with those infrastructure investments, really to make sure that all of that happens in an organized, planned, and orderly way. It also sets out what kinds of servicing is permitted. So whether it's full municipal water and wastewater services for new development, whether there's new development permitted on other types of services such as private or partial servicing. And overwhelmingly in communities like Port Elgin and Southampton, as well as throughout the province, development is directed to areas with full municipal services. On the transportation side, policies look at what transportation infrastructure is required, how should it be provided, and how can multi-modal opportunities be encouraged. So not just talking about moving people around in their cars or moving goods around in trucks and other commercial vehicles, but also about looking at trails and other infrastructure beyond recreational needs. So how can people get throughout the community by walking, cycling, and use of public transit, as well as connections to other communities. The official plan is obviously limited to those areas that I talked about, Port Elgin and Southampton, but needs to be mindful of where other regional transportation and transit opportunities exist and will be needed in the future. In terms of planning for community facilities, the official plan again helps to provide a land base for planning where those facilities will be located, how they can contribute to what we call complete community development, so people have access to a range of parks, recreation, and public services in their community. Regarding environment and natural heritage, this goes from identifying areas on the landscape that are sensitive to development and that are required to be protected, all the way to looking at the broader systems of open space, water resources, and even climate change to talk about what can be done locally to protect those systems and look at it in a broad sense to make sure that small decisions are together contributing collectively towards environmental protection and improvement and a healthy natural environment in the community, as well as those broader environmental issues such as climate change and reduction of carbon. So the official plan also establishes a vision for the future. So this vision has been set over the years through the town's official plan and has been updated from time to time. Generally, the review cycle for official plans is about every 5 years. The last official plan review resulted in an official plan amendment or a new official plan adopted by council in 2012 and approved by the county in 2014. So we're a little bit past 5 years, but we're in the process. And this process will renew the vision. So we really want to hear throughout this process people's thoughts about what sort of keywords and phrases and ideas are part of that future vision, you know, thinking in the long term, 20 to 25 years and even beyond. One of the key roles of an official plan is to designate where various uses of land will be located and how they're organized together. So this map is your current land use schedule from your current official plan. And we've just identified some of the typical land use designations that you find in an official plan that identify areas of existing and future residential development, commercial areas such as the core area of Port Elgin, recreational areas such as campground. There are also a different color of green for natural environment areas and open space recreational areas such as parks and golf courses. Employment areas, so where jobs will be located and industry. So this is really about looking at the communities holistically and figuring out where land use changes should be anticipated and what types of land uses are being planned for those areas. An official plan does need to be reviewed and updated. As mentioned, the last OP was adopted by council in 2012. It still has some very relevant and good components to it. So we were very mindful of that as we worked through the initial review and identified some key themes. As I mentioned, this review is an opportunity to renew the vision that was identified in 2012. It also needs to respond to changes that have been made at the provincial level, new information and policies that have come into effect since the 2012 official plan was adopted. In particular, there are 2 new revisions to the provincial policy statement, which is the primary policy document at the provincial level, the PPS. And the town's official plan under the Planning Act is to be consistent with that provincial policy statement. So you'll see in our report where we summarized some of the background review, there is a lot of emphasis on that PPS document, most recently updated and in effect as of May 1st, 2020. And then prior to that, there was a previous update in 2014. Just a quick note on process. So we are in the initial kind of priority setting and background review stage. What I really want to emphasize on this slide is the importance and inclusion of input opportunities across the full range of stakeholders and public throughout each stage in the process. So after tonight, the next stage in the process will involve further research and review, basically looking at the current policies, primarily within the 3 theme areas that we've identified, looking at opportunities where those policies could be expanded on, replaced, improved in terms of clarity and direction, updated to meet current circumstances, and really with the input of all of these groups to make sure that it's responding to some of the comments and concerns that we hear from those groups. Then the next stage is based on that information and consultation and consideration of options is to draft some new policies. So that doesn't mean that every policy in the official plan is intended to be replaced with a new policy, but basically this would identify proposed draft changes to the official plan. That will go through another round of consultation and we'll get feedback on those proposed draft changes, make sure that we have properly responded to everybody. And then we'll come back one last time through some statutory consultation with some proposed final policies for council consideration. With the outcome intended to be an updated official plan for consideration of adoption by council. And then ultimately the county is the approval authority for that official plan. So one of the, four of the key objectives of the process, I've mentioned the first one already, which is making sure that we align with the updated provincial and county level policies. So you'll see again in the report that we've summarized some of that policy direction from the provincial and county level. Really to make sure that as a public document, as a document that's intended not only for use by staff and council, but for all community members, development community, and everyone, that it's clear and easy to use. That there's consideration given to new and emerging issues and that we respond to those as we go through the process. And in particular, consider those priorities and issues that the community raises as we go through the process. So now on to the three key areas of focus that have been identified in consultation with staff and based on our review and also based on the consultation that has been undertaken to date. There have been a number of policy changes with respect to housing, and I won't go through them all, but policy changes at the provincial level and even legislative changes that affect the town's official plan. This is an example. We've highlighted what the Planning Act in the province refers to as additional residential units or ARUs. Basically, this is a form of making more use of existing housing stock. So think of your existing housing stock and the opportunity to renovate those homes or even add a detached building on the same property to accommodate additional dwelling units. And the province had previously amended the Planning Act to require municipalities to provide for a second unit on most residential properties if it's got a single detached unit, semi-detached unit, or a townhouse. The latest changes as of September of last year require municipalities across the province to provide for up to 2 additional units on each of those types of properties. Of course, you can apply some standards to that and make sure that there's enough space and that there's adequate servicing and all of those kinds of things. But this is really a good way to help make more efficient use of existing housing, accommodate some growth without having to use more land, and also improve the affordability of existing housing and new housing by basically supplementing it with rental income and also providing some affordable rental stock within existing housing. Some of the other key changes in the provincial policy statement, the province has really looked at this through the lens of how do we bring more housing on stream more quickly to provide more choice. And excuse me for a sec, I just have an alarm going off. Really to make sure that housing is within an affordable price range. And so this is about looking at supply and demand and making sure that there's alignment with the housing and homelessness plan and making sure that future housing needs are considered in the official plan in terms of the future needs, not only from the amount of housing, but the range of type of housing. Reference has been added to the PPS to market-based needs. And that's very important, and a new reference that reflects the fact that not all municipalities and communities are the same, and the market demands should align with what is being planned. What is being planned needs to reflect what the market is seeking. Some key directions and findings from the county level housing and homeless plan are summarized in our report in here. Basically identifying some options to increase affordable housing stock, such as tiny homes, what I was referring to as additional residential units or second units, non-traditional forms of housing. The county plan, or the county homelessness plan, highlighted that 18% of owner and tenant households in Saugeen Shores spend more than 30% of income on shelter costs. That's basically a threshold to delineate whether the housing is affordable. If you're spending more than 30% of your income on that, that's an indicator of an affordability issue. And Saugeen Shores is considered a high waitlist area for Bruce County administered social housing. Some trends identified on the chart here in terms of both the number of new detached and other forms of housing built on an annual basis. You can see that ranges from in the 100 to 130 range down to a bit less than 50 units for single detached, and a smaller portion of new housing being built as multifamily. We do know that in Saugeen Shores, like in many communities like Saugeen Shores, Port Elgin, Southampton, it's often a function of how much is available for purchase, and that will kind of drive how many permits may be pulled in 1 year. In summary, some of the key considerations for the OP review as it relates to housing include those second unit or additional residential unit policies, making progress towards the housing form targets. So right now the OP speaks to 70% low density and 30% medium or high density, again, grounded in the realities of the market. Reviewing the policies and tools that the municipality has available and any incentives that can be offered to promote affordable housing for lower income earners. Really also making sure that those special needs and aging community needs are accounted for as well by providing housing choice for people across the age spectrum. Natural heritage, we've just captured some of the key topic areas related to that as identified to date. Of course, as I mentioned, this spans a whole host of other topic areas related to water resources, climate change, and other issues as well. One of the key issues identified, though, is the need to update mapping as it relates to natural heritage features and areas, as well as look at the natural heritage system as a linked system of spaces. And this is illustrated in the two graphics to the right. This is not just about protecting individual pockets of nature, but actually a linked system. Defining what's important for protection, identifying policies that will be applied when new development applications and other land use changes are brought forward. On the water resources side, some of the key new policy directions in the PPS 2020 and in the source protection plan approved in 2015 include protection measures for protecting municipal drinking water sources, including your intake protection zones, which are shown on the maps, as well as protecting groundwater resources, surface water resources, and linkages between them. So some key considerations related to natural heritage for the OP review include updating the mapping and policies based on those other documents that I referred to, making sure we're reflecting the latest information and promoting a systems approach, and then also identifying some policy direction and targets for climate change, adaptation, and resiliency. So the PPS has been updated and it recognizes the reality that climate change is real, that it's causing some adverse effects, and that municipalities, communities need to plan for that so that there's some resiliency built in as those changes occur. The third and final key topic area identified through the review so far is what we've referred to as urban design, placemaking, and heritage. This is really about the look and feel and sense of place of the community. It's hard to put a word to what this topic area covers, so that's why we've used several words. But this is really about making sure that it's a well-designed, memorable place, people-friendly, that key features of the past that have historical elements to them are preserved, reflecting heritage resources and cultural heritage landscapes and other key features of the community. This is also about making sure the official plan provides appropriate policy direction for other tools that can be used, including required submissions for complete development applications, such as design briefs and similar submissions, development standards that respect the character of the community, as well as promote positive change and still achieve some of those objectives around housing type and intensification. So coming up with some standard approval conditions and development agreement clauses that can help contribute towards that. And in particular, focusing on the Highway 21 corridor and High Street as areas that in particular require more detailed design guidance. Key considerations related to this topic area for the OP review include continuing to update the guidance to support and enhance urban design and placemaking, ensuring the policies are aligned with the current development standards and practices and guidelines that are used, and to make sure that we review and update any heritage conservation policies and terminology that have changed at the provincial level through the Ontario Heritage Act and the 2020 PPS. So that is a quick summary. There is obviously a lot more detail to those three topic areas and some of the background in our report. We are at the initial stage of kind of the research and consultation process. So there's nothing recommended in terms of changes at this point in time. That will come later. But we are happy to see that we've received a number of comments. We haven't obviously had an opportunity to respond to those yet. They've come in as recently as just before the meeting. And we're happy at this point to answer any questions that you may have and to discuss this project with council and the community. So thank you for your time tonight, and Catherine and I are available for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Steve and Catherine. We'll start by asking members of the public they would like to make comments, those members who've joined us. And so I have two folks who've asked for that opportunity this evening, Laura Robinson and Ron Kirk. So I'll start with Ms. Robinson. You're still on. There you are.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Mayor Charbonneau. That was a very good presentation. And I would actually like to just address three areas of the plan that has been presented so far. And what I would like to do is look at it through a COVID conscious lens, because I really do believe that we need to plan short-term and long-term with that kind of a lens, especially when the lens also, it also is just plain good planning. And so the first area that I would like to address is the prioritization of active transportation. I really believe that, well, we've already known for decades that the positive health effects of walking and cycling and using personal mobility devices. And for the same amount of time, we've also known about the destructive nature of a fossil fuel transportation and what it is doing to the future of the planet. But we also know from a wealth of studies that outdoor activity plays a huge role in good mental health. And I think in terms of looking at things from a COVID perspective, we have to understand the amount of anxiety and difficulties that people have already experienced and will continue to experience, and plan in a way that we are giving them options for good mental health. And so I honestly believe, after years of doing this, that quietly moving through the woods, using your own energy, whether you're hiking, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, or mountain biking, it increases the chemicals and hormones that help us cope with stress. and it builds the smart part of the brain on top of it, as opposed to the very, what you might actually call the reptilian part that reacts when people are involved with or watch violence. There's a very different way in which the brain performs. And so I want to stress how important I think it is. I think the consultant gave a very positive backgrounder on the importance of active transportation. So I just like to remind people that the dedicated active transportation routes should be well marked, with speed limits reduced to 30 and with traffic calming installed. We need to remind people to share the road through the share the road signs, which I don't see up yet. And remember that just in downtown Southampton, for instance, lately, you'll see 7 or 8 bikes parked in the space where 1 car would be parked. So you've got 7 or 8 potential consumers in the space where you could only have 1 car. So maybe you would have two people shopping. I'm getting a.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think Councillor Rich just came in there and his audio's on. Hey, John, are you there?
I am.
Can you just hit mute for us?
Sorry about that.
That's all right. Apologies, Ms. Robinson. Carry on.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rich, and thank you, Mayor Charbonneau. Anyway, the most recent studies show that people who either walk or ride down any downtown spend as least as much as people who drive downtown, and they stay longer because it's a nice place to hang out on your bike or walking. So that's one area I think we need to prioritize right away and be prepared for the second wave of COVID in our active transportation plans. The other thing, though, I want to look at just outdoor recreation generally in the official plan. And I think we need to look at the accommodation of community gardens. We know that a lot of people will not be having the income that they used to have. And I think we need to ensure that those people have as much access as possible to healthy, nutritious food. And I also believe that gardening is also very positive for people's mental health. And I think we should do things like test the depth of Fairy Lake and see if we can have an outdoor skating rink available this year. And again, we know that outdoor places there'll be very little chance of any kind of COVID spreading when people are outside and spread out. So I want to encourage us to find outdoor places for skating rinks and make sure that the indoor skating rinks, like the Coliseum, are available for everyone. And I know that the library last year was renting out snowshoes, and it was very popular plan. I hope that that sort of thing continues, and that we start renting, or you didn't have to pay for the snowshoes, and the same thing could be said about skates. I want to make sure that our arenas have skates where children and all families can access these very important mental health and physical health issues. And I want to go back to the trail system, because the consultant did actually stress quite a bit about our trails, and I think that they can be enhanced in the winter. So we do have designated areas for snowshoeing, which are separated from cross-country skiing, and that we can groom those cross-country ski areas and really provide people with, I know we call them green spaces, but they are white spaces in the winter. For instance, Fairy Lake, we can make a trail between the school, GC Houston School, and Fairy Lake. That's about a 2-kilometer trail. So I want trails and green spaces / white spaces to be, and community gardens to be almost like instant priorities in this official plan review. And thirdly, I would also say that there has to be a prioritization of affordable housing. I looked at the graph that the consultants presented to us, and the single family dwellings are not affordable for most people. And I think we also have to understand that there is a lot of domestic violence that is unreported, and that children and women are sometimes literally hostages in their own homes and can't get out. And I look at, you know, the mayor's task force, or the joint committee with the developers. But what I think we need just as much as that committee is a committee that looks at who is in desperate need, emergency need of housing, and how do we ensure that those people get into those houses. I really like the ideas that the consultants presented about a single unit house also having being made so we can add a couple of extra units to it. And I believe that the town needs to think about very seriously about ways how we do that, and we aid developers and homeowners so they can do that, and that they do it as soon as possible, because we do have a crisis on our hands, and everything we do in terms of planning needs to address that crisis. So I will send in my paper to you after this, but thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Robinson. And now I think we have Mr. Kirk who would like to speak. Mr. Kirk.
There, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
I'm unmuted. Okay.
Yep.
My concern had to do with, again, the affordable housing. My question is, what will be considered affordable housing? Like, what income bracket would people have to be in? The reason I have this concern goes back to April 2008. I addressed an issue with Mike Myatt about affordable use of the swimming pool in Port Elgin. And I did some research. I used to swim quite a bit, and I did research at other pools. And the pool in Port Elgin, well, it was one of the smallest pools, and we had about half the number of hours available for swimming, but it was the most expensive. And for people to use it that were training for triathlons, or even training 5 days a week, just, you know, for leisurely lane swims, it was more than double the price of other pools. So I talked with Mike Myatt about this. I wrote him a letter with all my information, and he asked me how much the price was at the Hanover pool. And at the time, the price was $146 for a 6-month pass, and $255 for a year pass. And one of his answers really I found disturbing. He said he could not bring in the price at $255 because there was too much money in Saugeen Shores. And I checked that year in the Saugeen Shores Community Guide 2008, and the average family income was $86,611 a year. The problem is not everybody in Saugeen Shores made that income. There were a number of people below that income, and working people below poverty, people on government assistance, homeless people. I know homeless was mentioned already in the affordable living presentation. So I have that's where I have a huge concern on what is the definition going to be of affordable and what income bracket will it be set at? Because I mean, even now, 12 years later, there is more wealth within Saugeen Shores. We do see that with some of the huge homes that have been built. I didn't have to chance to get a hold of a community, Saugeen Shores community guide for the year. So I Googled the Saugeen Shores average income, and on the first thing that came up was called area score, and it said the average family income is $117,593. And again, same as in 2008, not everybody earns this. We have a lot of, you know, working folk that are living below that, working people in our community that are below the poverty line. We have homeless people. So I just want to make this addressed. I think people need to be aware of it so that we can come up with something fair for individuals. Yeah, I guess that's it for now. If anybody wants any of the letters I had drafted up before and the information, I'm more than willing to send them to anybody wanting them.
Certainly, you can go ahead and send us those letters through to the planner. I'm sure they'd be happy to receive them. And maybe I'll ask Mr. Weaver if he would like to make any comments to the questions Mr. Kirk has. Or Mr. Posner.
Oh, Jay, actually, I was going to send a letter to Jay. I talked to Jay earlier.
Yep, you can go ahead and send them to Jay. I'm sure he'll receive them and he'll put them into the public record.
Oh,
I don't know. So do you have comments, Mr. Weaver?
Yes, so I can speak to, you know, how is affordable defined, and really I can speak to it in terms of how the province says it should be defined, and that's not necessarily the way that it should be or is defined locally in Saugeen Shores. But you know, I'll let Jay and perhaps Catherine, if you have anything to add to this, you can add to my comments. But basically, the PPS provides a definition of affordable that says, you know, housing for which the purchase price results in the annual costs not exceeding 30% of the gross annual household income for low and moderate income households. So that's talking about ownership housing. And the lower moderate income household refers to households with incomes in the lowest 60% of the income distribution in the regional market area. So I mentioned that threshold, the 30% during our presentation. There are some other thresholds that are used as well. One of them is housing for which the purchase price is at least 10% below the average purchase price of a resale unit in the regional market area. So if you consider all of Bruce County, for example, the regional market area, an affordable ownership home would be one that's 10% below the average resale price. But if the 30% income, 30% of income threshold is lower than that, then that is the affordable threshold. In the case of rental housing, it's the least expensive of a unit for which the rent does not exceed 30% of gross annual income. So again, that 30% threshold is used, and that's applied to low and moderate income households. And then the other threshold is a unit for which the rent is at or below the average market rent in the regional market area. So it's not a percentage less, it's just less than the rent in the regional market area, the average rent. The county study helps to shed a little bit more light on that, what that means at the county level and what some targets should be. for Saugeen Shores, and that's summarized in our report. So I'll pause there and I'll let Jay or Catherine, if you have anything to add to that from our more detailed local research.
Could I just ask too, Steve, is this meeting recorded so I could watch it again? Because everything you just said was pretty quick, and I'd just like to listen to it again sometime so I can take it in. It is
Yep.
recorded?
The meeting is being recorded, yes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll offer that we can also just summarize those definitions. I know that's a lot of information and it's technical in nature, so we could summarize those in a written response.
I think that would be very helpful, Mr. Weaver. I know this will be a subject of great interest to council. So I think giving us all of that information in written form when you report next would be very helpful. Catherine or Jay, do you have more to add there?
I'll defer
Yeah, I actually just wanted to share something quickly. If you can see my screen, if it will show up. This is an infographic from the Bruce County Housing and Homelessness Plan, and this will probably get at some of your questions, Ron, just in terms of looking at least at the county level, how that income distribution breaks down and how that relates to what people can afford. So again, I'll let you look at that housing and homelessness plan on your own time when you have a little bit more time, but you might be interested in digging into some of this. And of course, we certainly appreciate your comments and concerns about affordable housing. It's a really serious issue across the whole province, across the whole country. So it's certainly something that we're going to be looking at and using the tools that we have available within the official plan framework to implement what we can. And of course, Bruce County, as the housing provider for the area, has been doing also really important monitoring and research on this issue as well. So I encourage you to look at some of their reports as well, which is what we've been doing in our review.
Oh, great. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Jay, did you have anything to add at this point, or does that cover it all?
Mayor, maybe merely what the Vice Deputy Mayor is about to say is that we have an attainable housing task force that I don't feel are encumbered by the provincial suggestions or even the county suggestions. Their task literally says find a solution and find solutions and recommend them to council that are appropriate for the town. So if that means they're going to look at tiers of affordability so that we have policy that looks at low income, at moderate, at homelessness, at a number of issues that exist in town, if they are making those recommendations, I think it's very much a role for them. And maybe if Mr. Mayor, the Vice Deputy Mayor has something to add, I can defer to him too.
Well, I'd just like to, if I could just close out the public portion of the meeting, and then I'll take questions or comments from members of the committee, just so that we can, I want to make sure that we do that before we get into that. So I don't know, Mr. Kirk, do you have anything more to add, or does that complete your comments?
Yeah, I just think it's an important issue. I mean, I was surprised a few years ago, I found out about how much homelessness we have in Saugeen Shores. You know, like it shocked me. I see that Mike Myatt has his hand up there. He wanted to comment, did you?
We're just going to complete your statements, and then we're going to have questions or comments from members of the committee. That's just our process, so it just makes it a little more straightforward. So if that's it, Mr. Kirk, thank you very much for your comments. I don't think we have any other members of the public who wish to speak at this time. So we'll close out the public comment portion of the meeting, and now we'll turn it over to members of council for comments and the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I won't go into any great detail about the three pillars that we'll be looking at this evening. One is affordable, attainable housing, and I'm of course chairing that attainable housing task force. And I did want to say to Mr. Kirk, you keep very good records. 2008, did you say, when I was Director of Community Services? Is that the email you kept?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, we'll certainly after this meeting, perhaps sometime in the next few days, we'll touch base and talk about that 2008 letter.
Absolutely, Mike. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just want to make comment. Mr. Kirk keeps great records.
Sure. Well, that's good. Always record what everybody says to you. Okay. More questions for clarification or comments from members of the committee? Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for Catherine and Steve for the report, and to members of the public for your comments, not just in tonight's meeting, but throughout the process so far since last summer, with the comments in the survey and the efforts of the committee, the advisory committee, and also all of those people who took the time and hopefully still will be continuing to take the time to send in comments. I have a couple of comments and then I've got some questions on the report. A couple of just comments about my observations. I was very glad to see the emphasis and recommendation in several places throughout the report about the importance of consultation with our First Nations neighbors, and to do that early on in the process on various projects. I also appreciate some of the specific recommendations of the advisory committee, including their recommendations to support diverse uses in our downtowns. I think that's very important to keep our downtowns vital. To provide and look for creative solutions to provide a variety of affordable housing options. And I believe our task force, Attainable Housing Task Force, is working hard on that. To strengthen our environmental policies, and particularly including a community tree preservation bylaw, which I really am excited to see down there in several places in the report, and I would like us to work hard on that. A recognition of the value of cultural heritage and its importance, and advocating for stronger use of the design guidelines in our official policies. I thought it was interesting in the committee's report, the emphasis on writing in more active policy language, for instance, trying to use shall as opposed to may, and coming up with, reviewing our policy language and doing that when we can. A couple of questions I have, and maybe this would be a question, this first one for Jay. Do you have an idea of when the county cultural heritage master plan is expected to be finished? And I know you probably don't know specifically, but any idea of a timeline?
No, certainly not specifically. I don't anticipate much longer to wait for a final draft. I've seen some preliminary comments, and I know maybe it was a month ago now already, where they've had further consultation and through their Facebook Live events, both the archaeological master plan and the cultural heritage plan. So I anticipate only a couple more months at most.
Okay, that's good to know. One question on page 32, I think it may just be a wording thing, but I wanted to make sure because I think it's an important point. There is a statement there that talks about establishing a list of stakeholder groups, and it says made available to the public. Should that be make available to the public and continue to meet with stakeholders? Like, I get your point. I think it's important for the public to know who the stakeholder groups are who are being consulted regularly throughout the process. Could you maybe, Catherine or Steve, comment on that? It says establish a list of stakeholder groups made available to the public and continue to meet with stakeholders.
Yeah, thanks for your question. I was just locating the point in the report there to make sure I'm referring to the right point. Actually, I'll refer it to Catherine. My understanding of that comment is that basically we want to make sure that the public is aware of who's on that list of stakeholders. But I'll refer to Catherine for further comments.
Yeah, that was the intention there, just so that it's transparent who is being consulted, who is being included, further down the line as the stakeholders continue to be consulted, whether it's through online avenues or through in-person workshops as things open up further. just so that it's clear who's been at the table, so to speak, and to make sure that people who want to be there commenting on these things are there.
Okay, thank you. Under the section of the report on natural heritage, particularly the section entitled Natural Heritage Implications for the Updated Official Plan, there's one statement there which states, quote, consider further guidance and policies on environmental and natural heritage protection to reflect community concerns and interests, end quote. So obviously we know from demonstrated public engagement on various issues, particularly involving significant woodlands, planning applications, as well as the survey results themselves, which showed the natural environment as being the highest issue, the top issue of concern among those people who were surveyed. I wonder specifically for tonight, can you give us more specific detail about what the public can expect regarding policy discussion on significant woodlands? When are we going to be talking about that? A lot of members of the public thought we might be making some decision on that tonight. I'd just like to try to give them more specific steps of what to expect.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question, and I know it's a very pressing issue, or it has been an issue for a long time in Saugeen Shores. There was a lot of discussion about woodlands and how they're defined, what makes them significant. Even going back to the 2004 work that I was involved in previously, and there's really two parts to that. One is that there are certain minimum things that every municipality has to do to be consistent with the provincial policy statement, as well as the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry Natural Heritage Manual. And there are other elements to it that are more driven by local conditions, and you have some flexibility. So if I can elaborate on that a little bit. So the significant woodlands have to be identified and have to be protected. Those are the requirements of the provincial policy statement. If there are studies that indicate that a woodland that the municipality has identified as significant, that indicates that perhaps it's not as significant as it was believed to be, or there are ways to mitigate impacts to it, then there is some flexibility in what the municipality could allow. Now, the municipality ultimately gets to decide how to define a significant woodland. There's some guidance provided by the province and through the Natural Heritage Reference Manual. And you obviously can't define something that the province, by its definition, would consider significant. You can't define that as not being significant, but you could go further than the province. So you can't be less restrictive than the PPS, but you could be more restrictive. An example of that would be deciding what is the minimum size of a woodland to make it significant. And the Natural Heritage Reference Manual will give you some guidance on that. So if you're in an urban area, it might be one threshold. If you're in an urban area, it might be another threshold. Another threshold will be, are there any species of trees, of plants, of wildlife, habitat that are unique or rare or endangered? And that would be another threshold or criteria that could be used to define whether a woodland is significant. The age of the trees, whether it's got core elements to it, core natural heritage elements to it, whether it links in with other features such as woodland, such as wetlands, corridors, water courses, all of those things. So there's a number of different criteria that can be considered and defined locally. We are not experts in all of that subject matter. We write policy and official plan, but natural heritage studies and environmental impact statements are written by experts in ecology and arborism and those kinds of things. So we do tend to prefer or official plan policies that allow that information to be considered and more detailed studies to come forward. But right now, we're not recommending anything in terms of a policy. And so we want to have a continued conversation through this process to see under that bullet that you highlighted there, what's happening locally. How does that compare with what the province defines these significant woodlands to be, and what policy options then exist for council to consider, and what are the merits of each option? So it's on the table. It's part of the discussion, and we want to canvass that thoroughly through this process. And maybe
Jay.
at that point, I'll defer to Jay or Catherine if they have anything to add on that
I think
topic.
Jay has a comment. Jay?
No, merely to provide additional local context is that the county of Bruce is doing a natural heritage study as well, and that we're participating in in the steering committee. The mayor is on, and I'm on the technical advisory committee with assisting the consultant who's providing the expert opinion on that. And the goal, if the priorities are affirmed tonight, is to make sure the county process generates information and so that we can provide local policy that we see appropriate for Saugeen Shores, for our woodlands, wetlands, species of interest, and any other environmental feature we have. So they are in the data mining stage. I'm trying to remember. They collected a lot of data at Christmas time. They have to run it through a big UNIVAC system, and then we get to look at that information and ask the public whether we've provided any sort of quality representation. And through the steering committee, if you have more to tell, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to let you tell me what's going on.
Just like everything, it's been delayed a bit by COVID-19, and I've been making some inquiries trying to get things back or see where we're at in terms of the steering committee's activities on that, and I'll report back to council when I have more information. But it is, and I'll just add, having been on that committee, and that it is complex and interconnected. There's an awful lot of, as Steve rightly pointed out, a lot of things to consider, and much like watershed management, natural heritage work is, I think, better done on a regional basis. Just like we look at watersheds regionally, we need to look at natural heritage regionally. Our natural heritage systems don't stop and start at our borders. So I think it makes good sense for the county to do the work and frankly, to spend the money on behalf of all of us to get that information together. And then hopefully we'll have that information and we can put an overlay in our own official plan that reflects that work and has some good scientific basis to it. Because this is not the kind of policy that you should just sort of make up and say, well, I think a significant woodland is 4 hectares or 3 hectares or 10 hectares. We need to have, it very much depends on the system in front of you and what relies on that system. So I think it's complex and they're doing that work at the county. I'm looking forward to seeing those results and looking forward to seeing us be able to use that information to come up with some good policy and draw some lines in the sand to say, here are the features we're going to protect. Here's where they are, and give that clarity to the public so that they know where the go, no go places are for development in the community. You have more questions or comments, Councillor Grace?
I have one more question, if I may. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it. This is going back, Steve, to your comments about the additional residential units within the Planning Act. I just wanted to clarify something. So we've had changes recently on that. I just want to clarify that the 2 potential units that could be one within an existing dwelling, like a home or a duplex, and one in an ancillary structure. But is my understanding correct that that you can't have 2 that are in 2 separate ancillary structures according to the Planning Act?
That's correct. Municipalities are required to make provision for either, both of one in the dwelling and one in ancillary structure, but not 2 in the dwelling or not 2 in the ancillary structure. So the net effect of that is that there's supposed to be provision for up to 3 units on a property. If you have the main dwelling unit in the house, a second dwelling unit, such as a basement apartment or something like that, and then the third in an ancillary structure. Now, with that said, it's not a limit. The municipality could go beyond the 3 total residential units, but it's only required to make provision for up to 3 on a property.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Further comments from members? Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and just want to thank Jay and Steve and members of the advisory committee for their hard work. I think they've done some really good work here and establishing those 3 key pillars. I think looking at the survey results that from the 220 or 30 respondents seem to be those 3 common themes kept coming out, and so I'm pleased to see that housing is right near the top of that list as a high priority. And Jay, I just wondering if I could through you, Mr. Mayor, to Jay, what I'm reading from the survey result, respondents and members of the public, they talk about a full review versus partial review. And way back in 2019, when we approved the $50,000 for the official plan update, it was more of a review than a full review, partial review than a full review. Can you just take us back a little bit, Jay, just for members of the public listening, why we opted for the partial review rather than a full review? I understand if talking to you today, we could add anywhere from another $150,000 to $200,000 for a full review, and that's what we decided not to do. So can you just maybe just take us back a little bit why we got to where we are today, how we got to where we are today?
Right. Well, I mean, part of it is, I hope this isn't too different from my conversation with you earlier, because I felt it was more specific. But in my sense of the review is that I work with the plan every day. I hear comments daily from other staff, and I have conversations with county staff who administer the plan on a daily basis. And what I found, and I think it was affirmed in the review, both with Steve and Catherine, is that much of the plan is already pretty good. I mean, it's compliant with the PPS even after its changes in both 14 and 2020. And so the type of review that we wanted was now, okay, what can we do that makes the plan better? And we had a budget amount of 50,000. We knew that there were pressing issues. We could focus our limited budget on those most pressing issues. And I thought, I think when we budgeted this, it was housing, economic development, and sustainability. I guess I was wrong on the economic development part, but I'm really pleased with what I found from the consultation and in the discussion is that we could focus the review. We read the whole plan. We saw that much of the plan is really good. And I think even Steve said it tonight, it's in the report, don't have the language in specifically, is that there are these 3 themed areas we can use the budgeted resource to improve the policy. So we know the housing policy works, but it can be a lot better. We know our environmental policy, as rudimentary as it is, satisfies the PPS, but we can make it a lot better. And so I think that's why I felt even 2 years ago when we budgeted for the project that I felt we could do a focused review.
Okay, I appreciate that, Jay. And I mean, I'm assuming we have to be in full compliance with the provincial policy statement, which we are, no doubt. And obviously you and Dan have given the official plan a full review. I'm assuming that took place where you've reviewed the plan in its entirety.
Yes.
Right. Said a few things, Mr. Mayor, in regards to growth management on page 11 of the report, 2.2 subsection 221. Provincial Planning Act updated in 2019 states the Planning Act requires municipalities to address key initiatives of particular interest, including. And then section 2 is the adequate provision of a full range of housing, including affordable housing. And, so for members of the public who still aren't aware, and it's good for people to know, there is an Attainable Housing Task Force. There's recommendations coming forth at the end of the year, and that housing committee is doing some good work. And council did approve $20,000 back in 2019 for an affordable housing study. We haven't asked for those funds yet. They're sitting in reserve, but there's lots of good work going to be done around affordable, attainable housing. So look for more information. Another point relating to attainable housing, I just wanted to throw this out to Jay again and Steve perhaps. I'm just wondering if there any wording in our current official plan that would prohibit tiny homes as one example, or laneway homes as another example, or is specific wording required? Are they allowed now? If not, can they be?
Specifically on tiny homes, there's no language in either the OP or the zoning bylaw that prohibits it. I think it's a market question. The land value that a landowner has is so high, they don't want to spend that much money on the property to build only a 200 square foot house, for example. There are for tiny homes, that is. Laneway homes, I don't think there is, although we do have a general policy for if they're laneways that are owned by the town, we'd want to consider whether those are surplus to our needs, and then would want to determine whether that should be set aside for housing, for example.
Appreciate that, Jay. What about, for example, you're putting in a little village, 20 or 25 tiny homes in one area? Would that be permitted somewhere under our current official plan, zoning bylaw?
Not without rezoning. So all of our higher density properties are properties that would require more than, or that would accommodate more than one unit, in very general terms, require the bylaw to be amended to allow for that type of development.
One thing, obviously, the Attainable Housing Task Force will be looking at some recommendations, certain, maybe looking at, tiny homes, laneway homes, those sorts of things. So in regards to the environment, natural heritage, you have a comment and a question, Mr. Mayor, and that's comment is that once again, the respondents to our survey and results from our stakeholder meetings made it clear that protecting our natural environment is of importance. And I agree this is important whenever and wherever possible, while keeping in mind that addressing our growth needs will have to undergo some scrutiny. In regards to natural heritage, there was a comment in our public submissions that this council supported the right of a natural heritage study. And Mr. Mayor, I really appreciate your confirmation that that natural heritage study is happening. And we did commit to that back to the Huron Street, Bay Street days up in the Rotary Hall, where we committed to a natural heritage study. So I guess it's one of those things. We'll wait and see what that study looks like. And I think you're right, Mr. Mayor, a regional approach is something we should be looking at. But I guess the question I did have, once the natural heritage study is completed, is it reasonable to expect, though, we still could go back and piggyback with the Bruce County Natural Heritage Study to look at more some localized areas, or not? Or is it strictly going to be regional? Or do you think, Jay, we eventually could expand upon what they're doing? Or is it too early to say that? I'm talking about Bay Street and Huron and other areas of town with, for example, Market Street. Should we, what kind of I just wanted to talk around natural heritage study. Should we be piggybacking with the county?
Well, I think we should. We haven't seen any of their results yet, so I can't say with any certainty whether that woodland is in or out, for example. However, they've got the information. If they are identifying it with at least considering it through their system, I think it's important that the mayor and I continue to keep participating and through the remainder of the public as the process unfolds, so that they are always aware that these environmental features are interconnected and they're important for local residents and not just a interregional sort of application.
Well, thank you, Jay. And in regards to urban design, placemaking, heritage, another pillar, which is great to see. I do believe this official plan should be addressing potential heritage blocks, not only relating to our Indigenous community, but also for any other significant residential areas that are of heritage importance. So I'm pleased heritage and culture was mentioned by so many of our residents as being important, and I would request that our official plan update reflect significant heritage blocks. And that is something, Jay, again, will be considered in your estimation. We'll be talking about that, the official plan update.
Yes, our plan contains some policy on heritage, particularly cultural heritage assessments and the identification of neighborhoods. And we could expand on that. We could enhance that. We could change it. It's entirely open-ended at this point.
Yeah. Okay. I hope there's more discussion on that with the particular heritage blocks. There are some, in my view, some very significant areas in our community that need to be addressed. Their three pillars are fairly hefty, no doubt. But I think we need to share our official plan update accurately and precisely address these areas. In my view, to Mr. Mayor, I think that, and I think the community is looking for this, there's a fair amount of comment about the quality of the survey. I don't know. I think it's one of those things where if you have a 10-page survey versus 5, some people say it's too long, and the 5-page survey, some people are saying, well, it's too not long enough. So I don't know what the sweet spot is there. But Jay, in your mind, is there an opportunity for additional surveys throughout the official plan review? We're very early still. Is something that you are considering with additional surveys? What's your thought around that?
Well, I've yet to have the conversation yet with our consultant, but I certainly am considering other avenues to consult too. A survey is just one tool. I am not so single-minded that I only want to use online surveys. I recognize not everybody wants to contribute that way, and that's why we're having a meeting, for example. But I'm now a little bit more cautious as to what the purpose might be. I never intended any survey to have a statistical rigor like a Statistics Canada survey. It has a different purpose. The first survey was to get a sense of what the top issues were. It wasn't necessarily to get a line-by-line commentary on the OP. So, and maybe I'll definitely be learning from that experience, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to continue to want to use surveys. I'm going to want to use focus groups. I still want to have public meetings. Though there was limited participation, I think due to weather, I liked being able to go to the farmer's market and just have people that wandered in and out talk a little bit. I think the next day it was the Southampton car show, and it rained, so there wasn't many people that participated in that part. But I think that's a new opportunity for me. I think the county has used that for their official plan review as well, and so there could be other ways of doing it. I am excited to know that because we can do Zoom now, that we can consult through the winter months with people that happen to not live here in the winter months. So that's an exciting way of consulting as well. So but none of them are set in stone. They're certainly, I think, issues dependent and participant directed. Not all the stakeholders will want to do a survey. They may need a conversation. And I'll just leave it there.
I think it's fair to say then what you're saying. It's still early in the process, and for those people saying, well, I haven't had enough say, there's still going to be lots more opportunity for people to have to say with official plan updates. So that's good to hear. And Mr. I just want to talk about windmills and with consensus from this council this evening, I'd like to hear from council members on this. I'd like to recommend that staff come back to council at a future meeting, and certainly during the official plan review timeframe, and present some wording around pertaining to windmills. And at a minimum, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to see wording that speaks to prohibiting windmills in Saugeen Shores. I know that's not popular with 100% of the people in our municipality, but I think that overall, what I'm hearing is that we need to say in our official plan that windmills are prohibited. So I would appreciate your comments, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to maybe think there might be a consensus of this council to provide such word, maybe send it back to staff.
Yeah, I think so. Of course, what you see before you this evening, these recommendations to proceed with these 3 subject areas with regard to this part of the process. I think looking at something like that, while it pertains to the official plan and it's an important topic, it might proceed through a sort of a separate process. And I don't know, Jay, do you have a comment or an idea as to how? So I'm confident members of council will likely have a few things, small things likely like that are outside of this particular process that might also be amendments to the official plan that they'd like to raise. Do you have a preferred method or approach to that to get it considered, and then so the council can consider making amendments like that?
Is that a question to me?
Yeah, I wonder if you...
I mean, I've had a few conversations. Telecommunications towers is another one. I prefer that they are separate. I am not keen to use the budgeted resources on these that I want to set aside for these 3 issues and have it expanded too much. I think some of those issues like wind turbines and telecommunications isn't use a lot of I don't think it costs a lot of money. They're more value judgments. If you want wind turbines, yes or no. If you do, where do they go? I don't know if they need to have studies. And so I guess what I'm getting at is if you had have them, I'd prefer the direction from council, or at least some indication of what the list should be. And then I can take it to senior management and they can help prioritize it in my day-to-day workload.
There's been some specific changes from the province with regard to the Green Energy Act and the Planning Act around industrial wind turbines. And so I wonder if we could get a report back to you from you at some point, Jay, when you're able, on what those changes have been, what the current state of play is from the province on industrial wind turbines, and council's options in terms of regulating them now as opposed to when we've last considered the official plan. There have been changes, and so I wonder, is that a reasonable request, Jay? Is that something that you can do?
Yeah, I think I can do that, and I can't give you a time.
No.
It would definitely be within the foreseeable future.
I think we could do that with the understanding that it would be when you're able. We have confidence you'll deliver it when you can. I don't see anybody objecting to that, so why don't we, on behalf of council, I'll make that request. Is there anything else from the Vice Deputy Mayor?
I do, and I'm sorry to take this long, but thank you for dealing with the industrial wind turbine issue. I appreciate it. Just around the tree canopy, and Councilor Grace has talked about it a little bit, but I really do believe, Mr. Mayor, I'm hoping that again consensus from a little bit separate perhaps, but I think our tree canopy has taken a bit of a beating over the years with development, and I think having a tree retention bylaw for council to consider at a future meeting. I know it's not totally related to updating the official plan, but it still should be, strong mention in our bylaw, official plan update about tree canopy and tree retention. And I'm really hoping that this council would support sending a request back to staff to start to put some thoughts together around a tree preservation bylaw. So if I could throw that out there this evening as well.
Yeah, I think that, sorry.
I can put some of these comments in writing back to staff too. Under growth management, Jay, you talk on page 14 of 65 reference to our current official plan, and the 10%, I just want to review one more time. I know it was discussed 5 years ago, but we're maintaining a minimum of 10% of all renewable growth to occur in the build-up area through intensification. Jay, where are we at with our 10% target, and how's it being tracked? And should the 10% remain at 10% in the official plan update? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I'll refrain from providing my opinion on what the policy should be. I still want to consult on that, but I think where we are is, I think I reported it in the my activity report. Maybe we didn't do one this year. I better do one. We are probably around the 7% out of 10, so we're really only 3 percentage points out. Though that it makes it sound like we're more successful than we really are, because I think that was our first go at trying to find a policy that encouraged intensification, at least 10% of the new growth as intensification, because how we mapped it was really not a very refined approach. We identified areas that weren't actually built up areas. So a new part of the Summerside subdivision, for example, every single house that was built counts towards intensification. I don't think that was the intention. So I guess I will say one thing about the reviews. I think we want to have more intentionality behind the policy, understand what we're doing and what the purpose is, and rather than just throwing a number out that says, oh, that'll satisfy the province. I think we need something that works for us.
Thank you, Jay. And I just want to talk a little bit about secondary dwelling units, and Articles 3.3731, secondary units shall only be permitted on lots that are serviced with full municipal sewage and water. And I think, Mr. Mayor, we should give some consideration to areas in the township where water services are available, but where town sanitary, maybe sewers are not available. There's been many advances in the composting toilets and larger volume septic tanks. And I'm just wondering, if we're really serious about secondary dwelling units, and we are, creating more affordable rents and so on and so forth, increasing our housing stock, you know, can we reconsider that policy in our official plan, you know, about not allowing, you know, secondary dwelling units in the township? And Steve, I don't know if you know what is customary around the province in rural areas, but and there's got to be some cases around the province where secondary dwelling suites are permitted in rural Ontario, not necessarily hooked up to sanitary sewer. Do you have any comment on that?
Sure, yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. There's definitely municipalities out there that permit second units on private services. You know, there's some information obviously required to demonstrate there's capacity. If it's, you know, a private well that's got capacity for an additional unit, and if it's private septic, you know, same idea. There are, on the other end of the spectrum, you know, like you, there are municipalities that say it's only where full municipal services are provided. So this full spectrum exists out there. You know, there really isn't a one way or the other is not necessarily the best practice. It can work in both circumstances. In a settlement area where you do have full municipal services, one of the concerns can be that it could undermine the eventual connection of everybody on full municipal services, or complicate that, or trigger it earlier than would otherwise be required by stressing the private services. But it can work on private services. So it is a policy choice that's available to council.
Right. Well, at present, Mr. Mayor, secondary dwelling suites, I just think we shouldn't be tying our hands. And I think if there's any way, I mean, perhaps if it was secondary dwelling in township, if, you know, maybe one of the requirements is they're on town water. I don't know. I just was hoping staff could go back and take another look at that policy. You know, under that you have to be hooked up to sanitary before you can, you know, construct a secondary dwelling unit.
Yeah, so of course, what's going to be happening here is the consultant and our staff are going to go back and draft discussion papers on these in these three areas. I'm sure they've heard your comments on that, and they're going to recommend some policy changes for us. And so I'm sure they'll give that consideration.
I just want to make mention of it, and and I know I'm being long, but there's two other items, and that's about our settlement area, expanding our settlement area. In the provincial policy statement 2020, Article 112, the article speaks to new policy directions around increasing our planning horizon from 20 to 25 years. So, Mr. Mayor, I again like to recommend we have some kind of consensus that staff reach out to Bruce County planning staff to request an audit of land availability in our current settlement area that will be able to accommodate 5,000 new residents by 2031, as today's report states. I'd also like to recommend that county staff provide a review of viability and necessity of expanding our settlement area for future commercial housing development for recreational purposes or for both. And some will say we have lots of land over the next 25 years, but I like to see the numbers quantified via Bruce County planning. And I'm just wondering, because this statement's in here about planning horizon for 20 to 25 years, can we again, could Daniel and Jay and Steve consider the fact that, you know, maybe we should be looking at expanding our settlement area? Is that part of the plan at all? And how will that be addressed?
Jay?
The short answer is yes, because if it's a housing question, we'll be able to look at what our needs are and our demands are, and whether we have the capacity to meet those demands. And so I don't think the outcome is likely that we'll be short on land, but we will do the math, and Catherine and Steve and Dan and Barbara will all have a conversation and find out what's the best way to calculate that quickly so we can get moving.
It would be nice, Mr. Mayor, to have some mention in the final report about the potential to expand the settlement area. Yes or no, why not? That's all. So just in closing, I think we're certainly on the right track, and we've completed our water and sewer study, recreation master plan, economic development master plan. We've got a transportation master plan. I heard Mr. Robinson earlier tonight talk about transportation. I reached out to Amanda Frost today, indicated there was a whole chapter on transportation, master plan. So, I think we're on the right track. I'm sorry to be so long-winded tonight, but I think I wanted to get those questions asked. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Further comments from members of the committee? Councilor Maya.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Chair. I had written down here as we were going through the presentation also, and and the Vice Deputy Mayor did cover it as well in his last question, which was the lines of separation between the settlement areas of Port Elgin and Southampton, and the settlement areas that are now in former Saugeen Township, or the Saugeen Ward. And as we know, and as I have to say sometimes, is that Saugeen Ward is the fastest growing ward in Saugeen Shores, because I would say if not most, if not all, of the new housing development is taking place in those areas that are in the Saugeen Ward. And so when we talked about, it caught me by surprise when it was said early on that this master plan only covers the former boundaries of Southampton and Port Elgin, and that what's going on in my ward is in fact just covered by the county's official plan. So if that is in fact the case, then one of two things: I don't have to pay too much attention to this from the point of view of the people that I represent, or we change the boundaries of the settlement areas, as was suggested by the Vice Deputy Mayor, and encompass all of Saugeen Shores in this official plan, wherever it might be. And I just wonder if the planner or the consultant would perhaps comment on, which way we should go. If we're looking decades down the road, then I can see that there won't be any areas between Southampton and Port Elgin. We'll be all together, and certainly we're across Mill Creek and we're coming out my way. I hate to think of subdivisions going in around my house, but I suppose in the future it could very well come to pass. So anyway, any comments on that would be appreciated, and certainly consideration of how we handle situations like that as they arise, because they're arising all the time. It's a constant arising, because, as I said earlier, all of the development is going on in Saugeen Ward right now.
That's because of the outstanding leadership being provided by you and Councillor Carr. Jay.
That's
No,
true.
I think I often do this. I generalize and say developments heading to Port Elgin or developments heading to Southampton, but really the plan does cover parts of Saugeen Township. It's just the parts that are developing, that there you see the urban growth. You see them along the shoreline at Saugeen Beach Road, Miramichi Bay Road, or in other parts, say Lamont Pit, I don't even think is in Port Elgin Ward. I think it's Saugeen Ward. Having said that, I think there's a value in retaining a separation between much of what is rural and urban, between both the county plan and the local Saugeen Shores plan. One is that I think the county is better positioned to be able to manage those issues that are often relevant to regional interests, like resource management, environment, as the mayor has mentioned, should be regionally examined, and so agriculture, environment, and sort of the broad sense of growth management. I think, and where the lower tier, Saugeen Shores, is very much better equipped, in my opinion, to deal with the rapidly urbanizing areas of town. We're on the ground, we're there daily, etc. That isn't to say we couldn't have a plan that covers the entire township. We could, we just identify the settlement area in certain areas and non-settlement everywhere else. I think another reason I like to separate it is that it avoids having a duplication and the potential for conflict. So if I had policy in Saugeen Township, the county would also have policy for township, and there's a chance that we don't say the same thing, and a landowner, when they want to do something, would find potentially conflicting policy, and that's not ideal from my perspective. So I like the separation as it exists now. If we do want to expand the settlement boundary, I would engage the county to say, all right, provide more settlement area within the county plan, and then so they lose a bit of the rural area, we get a bit of the urban, and it sort of keeps the policies separate. But I mean, I would say that's a little too broad for this discussion. To have any more specific, conversation. The county is doing their review, and perhaps during their review, there'll be more conversation about settlement areas and the division between sort of a federalism between lower tier and upper tier.
Okay, are there further comments from members of council? I just have a couple of comments myself, if there are no others. Just picking up on that last point, and it's an important part of the review that we're supposed to do of the official plan, which is to review the town's role within the county and its relationship with other municipalities. And I think I'm not suggesting that we should add that as a fourth pillar or anything, but I do think we need to have, I wanted to raise it tonight because we do need to have an eye to what our position is going to be on that. The County of Bruce is accelerating the work that it's doing on reviewing the planning services agreements between the municipalities and the county. We should have a strong view, I think, on how those planning services agreements should look, so that when it comes to implementing this official plan, as well as our zoning bylaw, site plans, et cetera, that we are maximizing the amount of local decision making that is taking place. More decisions on the implementation and changes to these plans should be made in Saugeen Shores than are made on Park Street in Walkerton. So we should be pushing the county to download as much of the decision making as possible, if you like, to the town of Saugeen Shores. Maybe what Councillor Mayette is suggesting isn't such a bad idea in terms of planning, having responsibility for planning more for what happens in those areas that are not currently covered by this official plan. I think that that's a significant change and requires more discussion, but more broadly speaking, there's a lot of, we are an extremely fast growing community, the fastest growing community in the county by a long shot. A great deal of planning activity is happening in this community, and it should be being decided upon close to home. So we need to have that discussion and separately from this, but it's important, and it is part of the OP and our responsibilities in reviewing the OP. I wanted to just make a comment as it pertains to the three pillars. I completely support the three-pillar approach and this focused approach on reviewing the OP, and not just because of the budget, although that's important, but because a review of the entire document. I've been through a couple of these now over the years, and I find that a review of if we as a council try to review the whole document and look at the whole thing and all the pieces, you have a very broad process. It's a mile wide and an inch deep, right? I find you don't get deep enough into the pressing issues to really make significant change. What this approach lets us do is focus on the highest priorities of the municipality: housing, natural heritage, cultural heritage, and dive deep into those subject areas and make real change. And that's what the public wants. The public has identified these as being critical. Our committees identified them as being critical. Now we can get in-depth policy documents, discussion papers from our consultant and our staff. We can examine comprehensive policy changes in these areas, and we can set the community up for success in those areas. And frankly, if this council can succeed in making improvements in those parts of the plan, good lasting changes, then that will be a major accomplishment, and probably a greater accomplishment than just skimming over the whole document and making minor tweaks here and there. So I think that this is the right approach. Having seen it approached a few different ways, I think this is the best way to do it, and I'm keen to get into these areas. But I think that we need to, as we set priorities, I think we need to have an eye to what the top priorities are and make sure that when we're setting policies that we don't allow other regulation to prevent us from making progress on those areas. And for me, I've been pretty clear about this for the last several months. The number one priority is those 350 people, individuals, families, and seniors in Saugeen Shores who are on the wait list for Bruce County Affordable Housing, who cannot find a place to live in the town of Saugeen Shores. We represent fully a third of all people on the registry for affordable housing in the county of Bruce. We are the most rapidly urbanizing community in the region, and we're going to have more people over time. Mark my words, we're going to have a higher and higher percentage of those people looking for affordable housing in our community. That's what happens in urbanizing communities. So we need to have serious policy to address that issue, and we have to. That means setting. I mean, I like what the committee said too about tougher words, shall, will. I mean, those are the things that we need to say when it comes to affordable housing, and it needs to pertain to people looking to build in this community. This is an attractive place to build. People want to develop here, and people can make money developing here, and I like that. I want them to make money. But in return, they need to provide us with some affordable housing and some rental housing. And that can't be optional, and it can't be may or might, it has to be shall. So we need to have some strong policies in place coming out of this OP review. And that has to be, in my view, our highest priority. And we can't set up other policies that frustrate our ability to do that. And I think sometimes people will pick out pieces of these policies, this broader official plan, to frustrate developments that they don't want to see. So, I'm fine. I want to see us implement this natural legacy system from the county, and I want us to have clear definitions around that. I'm eager to look at cultural heritage, but what I cannot countenance is policies in those areas that keep those 350 families out of homes. So we have to make sure that we keep our priorities straight and we get balance in that for those people. So I think, that's key. And the other thing too is I'd like to see the policies in these three areas that we're looking at simplified from where they're at right now, because natural heritage, for example, I spent enough years on the Conservation Authority to know when you do mapping, and the mapping is just an estimate. It's just here's the line, but the line isn't really the line. It could mean anything. That has a tendency of confusing people and making people distrust regulations and then avoid them. So we need to have clear policies. If we're going to have a map in this plan that says here's where the natural heritage zone is, here's where a significant woodland is, we got to draw that line, and that's got to be the line. And we cannot turn around and say, oh yes, that's the line, but you have to read the regulation to know where the line really is, and you have to call a conservation officer, and you have to go through this. If we tell people there's a line, that's where the line is. And we have to have that level of clarity so that and it has to be simple. The document, just to be very clear in my view, if I'm not being clear enough already, the document we have right now, the OP, is too big. It's too long. Nobody reads it because you can't understand it. It's got to be simple, much simpler than it is. Clear regulations. And our tendency has been over the years, as we review the OP, to make it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and more wordy and more complex. We must reverse that trend in these policies. It has to get shorter and it has to get clearer. So there's my wish list. If I have a wish list for you of things that I'd like to see come out of this, those are the things. And I know you guys are going to do hard work and put together some good discussion papers for us. I think that's, I really look forward to seeing those. I know you will do great work on them. And I think it's going to spark a conversation. And as the Vice Deputy Mayor rightly pointed out, we're going to go to the public again many times, looks like about 3 or 4 more times at different iterations of this. We're going to hear what the public thinks about these discussion papers you've brought forward and the decisions that come out of them. And we're going to get to go around the horn, and I'll get to say lots more things like I've just said, and every member of council will, and every member of the public will have that chance too. And we'll come out with an approach that certainly won't satisfy everyone, but hopefully will be in the best interest of the community. So, so thank you guys very much for your presentation today and for giving us this opportunity for this conversation. And if there's nothing further, then we might close this public meeting. All right. Thanks very much. So
Thank you.
that takes us then on to reports. And we have 3 reports this evening. And the first one is Z 2020-022, Dane Butner for 569 Market Street. And the planner, I assume it's Daniel, will present.
Yep. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to bring up the presentation here. Okay, so just to refresh committee's memory, this is at 569 Market Street. It's a commercial core property, but it has a residential use on it, which is permitted in the commercial core. The applicant, Dane and Samantha Butler, are looking to add 6 more units for a total of 10 units on the property. There's currently 4. Here's the site plan. So they're proposing to add an addition onto the back. And if committee recalls, there was much discussion around the parking and safety issues at the intersection of Waterloo and Market Street. So we sort of brought that back and discussed it amongst staff and with the applicant. And I think it was the feeling that site plan control is really the tool to address site design and implementation with regards to parking, but there is still an opportunity through the zoning bylaw to facilitate that, to ensure the safety issues are addressed through the site plan control. So the site plan, or the bylaw, has a special provision that requires the parking area to be outside of the sightline triangle of Waterloo and Market Street. And it also requires it to be located as far away from the intersection as possible, while still meeting the parking provisions of the zoning bylaw. So I covered that in terms of the designation. Town of Saugeen Shores had concerns about parking and drainage. As discussed, we discussed the issue with the town and sort of came up with this solution in the zoning bylaw amendment that's being proposed. The SPCA noted the application is acceptable, and there was no other issues raised by agencies. No public comments were received on this application. And so just to recap, it's a zoning bylaw amendment to allow a special provision in the commercial core to allow the density that would permit the 6 additional units, with some special provisions for the parking to be located as far away from Waterloo and Market Street. So the recommendation is that the zoning bylaw be approved and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. So I would be happy to answer any questions if there's any.
All right, thank you. Daniel has read the recommendation. So are there questions or comments from members of the committee? I would just say for myself, I think that those provisions around parking are good, and appreciate your work and the applicant's work on doing that. I think that makes good sense. So if there's no comments and you've heard the recommendation, I'll ask all in favor. That's carried. And you guys will have to forgive me. I screwed up and forgot to read the recommendation on the official plan report, and which I should do so that we can vote on that and approve it. So I'm just going to double back to that report just briefly here and get a vote from council on that. There is a recommendation that council direct staff to undertake the next stage of the official plan review and focus on land use policies related to 1, housing and growth management, 2, the environment and natural heritage, 3, urban design, placemaking and heritage, and that staff use the budgeted resources to review, research, and consult with Saugeen Shores residents, community partners, indigenous communities, and government agencies on these focus issues, and that the official plan public advisory committee recommendations be considered as we proceed through the OP process. Is there any discussion? I don't see any. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Apologies for that. All right, we'll go back now then to Item 6.2.2 L2020-010 and Z2020-017 Deb and Les Kellerman, care of Brian Schuler, 274 Front Street South. And we'll turn it over to Daniel for the report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 274 Front Street. And again, to refresh council's memory on this, this is to legalize two accessory units to the property, both located outside the primary residence. So it's in Southampton along Front Street. Sorry, give me a sec here. And as noted, there's two accessory units on the property outside the primary. There's a smaller shed at the back that's predates the zoning bylaw, from my understanding. And then there's a newer structure. It's a garage with a accessory unit on the top. So both, obviously the property is within 500 meters of the shoreline, which is not permitted to have secondary units currently in the zoning bylaw. So that's one issue being addressed. If you recall, at the public meeting, there was much discussion around secondary units and the provincial direction on secondary units. After some consideration of the provincial direction, planning staff suggest that the proposed use is more representative of intensification rather than secondary units. And that's primarily because, as we heard in the last presentation, the new policies do provide an ability for municipalities to locate secondary units in ancillary buildings, but that's limited to one unit. And this one, there's two units. So planning staff suggested this would be an intensification opportunity rather than a secondary unit amendment exercise. That comes with, just as a note, there's prohibition or limited appeal rights on secondary unit amendments, whereas intensification amendments would not have limited appeal rights. So the proposed amendment would allow 3 units on proposed official plan amendment would allow 3 units on the property, and it doesn't specify within what structure type. It just sets a limit of 3 units at 35 units per hectare. And similarly, the zoning bylaw, proposed zoning bylaw amendment, also establishes 3 units and a similar density cap on the property. So it's noted that although this isn't exactly in line with the provincial policy on secondary units, it's still, there's still some guidance, I think, in that policy direction, and the province is permitting up to 3 units on residential property. So the Planning Act, of course, as we just heard, allows a unit in the primary, a secondary unit in the primary structure, as well as a unit outside in an ancillary structure, for a total of 3 units on the property. So in that sense, it does maintain the intent of the provincial direction, although it doesn't specifically conform to it. In terms of departmental and agency consultation, the application is acceptable to the SPCA, no comments from the town. There's a number of public comments raised on this application, if you recall, and we did receive a few afterwards, particularly concerns regarding short-term rentals, parking, noise, potential for the units to be expanded. Property could become a commercial enterprise, does not preserve the character of the neighborhood, and sewage capacity. So to that end, the official plan does contain criteria for medium density uses, and I would suggest, without going into great detail, that the proposal does meet the criteria outlined in the official plan for medium density residential uses. I believe there's enough buffering and adequate measures in place should noise or parking become an issue. There's existing tools that the municipality has at their disposal through bylaw enforcement and so on, that they could deal with those issues. But as noted in the staff report, council may want to consider investigating a more comprehensive approach to short-term rentals, because they're obviously an issue in Saugeen Shores, quite prevalent throughout the lakeshore area. There's municipalities and doing some background research, particularly Blue Mountains, that have Town of the Blue Mountains, that is, that have implemented short-term rental policies and regulations through their official plan, zoning bylaw, and other bylaws that would require licensing. So that might be an avenue for council to investigate if there's if this type of development becomes more prevalent, or we're seeing more of these before a committee. So the recommendation, I won't get into that, but the official plan amendment is being requested to legalize 2 additional residential units on the property, and I'll just leave it at that. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay, thank you. I'll just read the recommendation then, and maybe I will read the recommendation. Oh, there it is. So the recommendation is that the committee adopt official plan amendment L 2020-010 by Deb and Les Kellerman, and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to County Council for approval. The committee approves zoning bylaw amendment Z 2020-017 as attached, and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to Council for adoption, and that final adoption of the associated zoning bylaw amendment Z 2020-017 be deferred pending approval of the official plan amendment by County Council. Questions or comments to the recommendation? Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I do have a couple of questions. I see Mr. Schuler's on the call, and maybe he could answer two of these, I suppose. Are the 2 secondary units are they currently being rented?
Mr. Schuler, do you have an answer to that question?
I believe they are. Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you. Jay, could you comment on whether that's, is that legal?
No, we don't think they're lawful. We certainly wouldn't be going through this process if we didn't think they were lawful units as they exist.
My next question is about the rates. There was a letter from Mrs. Stevenson indicating that she found the rental rate that on your website as being, I'm wondering if that's accurate or not. I wonder, she mentioned the main house being rented for $2,400 a week, the garage apartment for $1,400 a week, and the 1-room cabin for $1,900 a week. I looked at the website, I didn't see rental rates. I wondered if you wanted to comment on that.
Schuler, do you have an answer to that?
I haven't seen any rental rates either. I'm sorry. I'm not aware of the rental rates.
Okay. Those are my 2 questions. I do have some comments on this. I appreciate the fact that the applicants are in a tough spot. And I appreciate the fact that they're taking steps to try to make this legal. That said, county planning staff tells us that while the Planning Act allows for more than 1 additional residential unit on one property, within the Planning Act guidelines, only one of those should be in a detached accessory structure. Staff expresses in their report further concern that the Planning Act affords limited appeal rights to secondary unit applications, whereas normal appeal rights are applicable for residential intensification applications. And staff recommends that this application be approved under the justification of encouraging residential intensification as opposed to within the Planning Act's guidelines on secondary units. On page 6 of the report, planning staff states that both the town and county official plans encourage residential intensification to encourage housing supply and to better utilize service lands, which are near services and amenities. Why does the province and our municipality support intensification? Among other reasons, to serve the public interest, to provide more housing units, and with increased supply to provide more affordable and attainable housing units. Will these goals be met if this application were to be approved based on the justification of residential intensification? The applicants have stated that their intent is to rent only short-term. The provincial definition of short-term rental is a period of 30 days or less. If that's the case, will the town's affordable and attainable housing goals be furthered through this application? I would say not affordable housing. The weekly rental rates are not commensurate with the Saugeen Shores definition of affordable rental housing rates. In 2018, those costs were listed as $754 a month for a 1-bedroom unit and $945 for a 2-bedroom unit. One could argue, I suppose, that these short-term rental units could free up more housing supply. In my mind, however, we're really talking about two completely different housing markets. Short-term rental accommodation for visitors and tourists at premium prices, and long-term rental housing for residents who need affordable and attainable housing options. Our approval of this application would not directly assist us in reaching our goal of providing more affordable or attainable housing. If the applicants were choosing to rent only one of the secondary units and in a long-term capacity and at a rate commensurate with long-term rental market, I could support the use of the residential intensification justification that's presented to us by staff, but that's not the case stated in this application. Additional goals of residential intensification are to provide new housing within areas which are serviced by already existing infrastructure, so there's a reduced expense for the municipality and developers, and there's less development in valuable agricultural or woodland areas. Those are good goals. Since these additional units are already built, hooked up to electricity and water and sewer services, and we were told in our June 15th meeting will all be on one existing account, those goals of intensification in this situation, I don't believe are relevant. Yet another goal of residential intensification is to promote community connections by increasing density. Staff's report tells us that density will increase if this application is approved, but whether community connection will also increase with a series of short-term rentals is uncertain. Providing more housing for tourists is, to be sure, a benefit to our town, but not at the expense of deciding to set a precedent which goes against our current official plan, zoning bylaw, and the Provincial Planning Act's policy on secondary suites. In our last meeting on this application, comments were made indicating that a denial of this application would be in violation of the Planning Act's guidelines on secondary suites. However, the Planning Act guidelines include suites, include in a one secondary suite in a detached secondary unit per property. So I don't believe that that is true in terms of the violation. Perhaps that's why the residential intensification approach is being recommended, but I don't believe that's applicable, given the fact that the type of rental units in this situation do not advance our town's goal of providing more affordable and attainable housing options. The town's official and zoning plan and zoning bylaw also doesn't permit secondary dwellings in a detached accessory structure. Staff also states in the report that while our town's official plan allows garden suites in a detached accessory dwelling, this wouldn't apply in this application because the arrangement must be temporary for a period of no longer than 20 years. And the other reasons stated in the town's official plan as to why garden suites wouldn't apply in this case are because the principal dwelling must be occupied by the owner and the garden suite must not be used as a rental dwelling unit for profit or gain. To approve this amendment would be setting several precedents which are not advisable. It would go against our town's official plan before we have the opportunity to address this issue in our official plan review. And this approval would depart from the Provincial Planning Act's policy on secondary dwellings regarding more than one secondary dwelling in a detached accessory building on one property. In my opinion, staff's request to approve this application under the umbrella of residential intensification doesn't advance the municipality's attainable housing goals, nor has sufficient evidence been given of how this approval would be in the public interest, as is stated in the proposed official plan amendment. I would like to see this go to further study, and so I would ask that this be deferred until we have an opportunity to look at this in terms of our whole study of secondary suites and ideally short-term rentals. Thank you.
Is that a motion to defer, Councillor Grace? Yes?
Sorry, yes.
Okay, so the councilor's made a motion to defer. Is there a seconder for the motion to defer? Councillor Smith seconds the motion to defer. The motion takes precedent. Linda, remind me again, is the motion to defer debatable?
Sorry for the delay there. I think we're going to have to answer your question, just kind of for the purpose of the deferral, that debatable. I would suggest that you're making a decision under the Planning Act. So there is merit in hearing all of the comments so that we have it well documented on what basis that the deferral has been granted. So what I have here is that the deferral is being asked for until we look at secondary suites and possibly a rental policy. We would kind of need to have a time frame. This almost needs to be a deferral so that we get a staff report back in the very near future on what the time frame is there, because the applicant does have the right to appeal under the Planning Act and get a decision made. And I would have to defer to Daniel to update you on what the legal requirements are and what the town has to make a decision based on in a certain period of time. So I would just put that caution out that we are making a decision under the Planning Act.
What I need to do is determine whether a motion to defer as raised by the councillor is in order. Is it in order at this moment to take that motion to defer as the councillor has expressed? Daniel, in terms of the process, what are council's options?
Yeah, so I would say it's complicated by the fact that the Planning Act timelines that would normally apply in terms of the applicant's appeal rights for a non-decision were suspended due to the provincial order, which suspended Planning Act timelines. The application was received in January, late January, I believe. So I'd have to do sort of a detailed accounting of when it was received, the implications of the suspension to the Planning Act, plus how many days have taken place since this suspension was uplifted. I suspect that the applicant would be entitled to appeal based on a non-decision, just based on the time that has lapsed. But I'd have to confirm that through more detailed accounting.
And Daniel, am I correct in thinking that the application is to be reviewed based on the planning policies in effect at the time the public meeting is being heard?
Yeah, so it's a lower tier amendment. So in terms of the policy considerations, we're looking for conformity with the upper tier plan and the PPS for the amendment. And then the zoning bylaw amendment would have to conform with the lower tier. So that lower tier amendment has to be in place before the zoning bylaw amendment can be technically approved by council.
So based on what I'm hearing, the motion to defer is in order. You've heard comments from the planner and from the clerk about the context around the motion to defer. And so that's good information, but I believe the motion to be in order, and it's up to council to decide whether it wants to take that action based on what you've heard at this point. So, and I think the motion to defer takes precedence, and that clearly stated, the motion is to defer until council is able to review its policies around secondary suites. Am I expressing that right, Councillor Grace? That's good enough? Okay, so that's the motion. So if there's nothing further, I'll ask all in favor of the deferral. Opposed? Carried, motion's deferred. Okay, so that moves us then on to 6.2.3, Town of Saugeen Shores temporary use outdoor patios, and Daniel, or is it Jay who has this report? Jay?
Not me, I think we're asking Barbara.
That's right.
Oh, is it? Sorry, apologies, Barbara.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's no presentation for this report, but I can answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, give me half a sec here. I'm just gonna call back up. Agenda and planning report. Okay, so we have a recommendation that committee approves zoning bylaw amendment Z 2020-047 by the Town of Saugeen Shores, and that the necessary temporary use bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. Are there questions or comments with regard to the recommendation? No? All right, so we have, this recommendation is before us. We will vote on it, and if it carries, then we will consider a bylaw immediately afterwards to adopt this finally. The purpose of that, of course, is to get it in place with great haste. So you've heard the recommendation. All in favor? It's carried. So then that moves us then on to the bylaws, and we have a bylaw here, 7.2.1, bylaw 51/2020, and I have a motion resolution that bylaw 51/2020 being a bylaw to amend zoning bylaw number 75/2006, being the comprehensive zoning bylaw for the Town of Saugeen Shores for outdoor patios associated with a commercial use, is hereby read a first, second, and third time and finally passed and sealed this 20th day of July 2020. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by Mattson, seconded by Carr. Questions or comments to the resolution? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. All right, that moves on to adjournment. I have a resolution that this planning committee meeting of July 20th, 2020 hereby adjourns at 9:05 p.m. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by Smith, seconded by Grace. All in favor? That's carried. We stand adjourned. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.